Coming up on Network Africa, President Salva Kiir grants amnesty to all those involved in the nation's civil war, including rebel leader Riek Machar. Zambian authorities deport top Zimbabwe opposition politician Tendai Biti in defiance of a court order. And Congolese officials and the World Health Organization begin vaccinating health workers against Ebola. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. We begin today in South Sudan, where President Salva Kiir has given a blanket amnesty to rebels, including his rival Riek Machar. The announcement comes days after the government and rebel groups signed a power-sharing deal aimed at ending almost 5 years of civil war. Fighting broke out in December 2013 after President Kiir accused his sacked deputy, Mr. Machar, of plotting a coup. Mr. Machar denied the charges, but then mobilized a rebel force to fight the government. Tens of thousands of people have been killed in the conflict and millions were forced from their homes. South Sudan's warring parties have also signed security arrangement deals as part of an ongoing peace process. In southern Africa, Zambian authorities have deported top Zimbabwe opposition politician Tendai Biti in defiance of a court order. The police in Zimbabwe have been searching for Mr. Biti for allegedly inciting post-election violence. He fled to Zambia on Wednesday seeking asylum. His lawyer, however, says authorities defied the court order and have handed him over to Zimbabwe police. Mr. Biti, a prominent human rights lawyer and former finance minister, is now expected to answer to charges of inciting violence and announcing false election results. At least 6 people were killed in an army crackdown on protests against the results. Meanwhile, the UN Refugee Agency says it is gravely concerned by reports that a senior Zimbabwean politician was refused asylum in Zambia and sent back to his own country. In a statement, the UNHCR says if the report is true, it would be a serious violation of international law. Zimbabwean police took former finance minister and opposition leader Tendai Biti into custody today after Zambian authorities rejected his bid for asylum and deported him. In East Africa, President Joseph Kabila of the Democratic Republic of Congo will not be seeking a third term in December's election. The governing coalition has nominated former Interior Minister Emmanuel Ramazani Shadary to be its candidate. Mr. Kabila's second term ended in 2016, but elections have been delayed and there had been speculation that he would run again. Mr. Shadary will face former Vice President Jean-Pierre Bemba, who returned to DR Congo last week after being cleared of war crimes at the International Criminal Court.
Now I come to the conclusions of the consultations that President Joseph Kabila Kabange, moral authority of the Common Front for the Congo, has led in order to find a name, a rare bird, who will represent our political family at the presidential election and behind whom we will all align ourselves, and that we are at this very moment driving to the Independent National Electoral Commission. He is Comrade Emmanuel Ramazani Shadary, Permanent Secretary of the PPRD. The announcement by spokesman Lambert Mende that former Interior Minister Emmanuel Ramazani Shadary would represent President Kabila's ruling coalition in the December 23rd vote came just hours before the deadline to register candidates. The president was due to step down in 2016 at the end of his constitutional mandate, but the election to replace him was repeatedly delayed and he refused to commit explicitly to not seeking a third term. That sparked protests in which the security forces killed dozens of people and stoked militia violence in the Democratic Republic of Congo's volatile east. President Kabila had come under strong pressure from regional allies such as Angola, as well as the United States and the European Union to stand down. The selection of 57-year-old Ramazani is, however, a defiant move. He is under EU sanctions for alleged human rights abuses, including deadly crackdowns by security forces on protesters.
I said the candidate from the majority doesn't have much of a chance of getting through in the election. On the opposition side, we see candidates who have been close to the people, whilst the majority is less able to adapt on the ground. We are pleased because there's at least a successor. But for the elections, I don't hold much hope in the presidential majority.
Kabila will remain at the head of his People's Party for Reconstruction and Democracy, PPRD, and has installed loyalists across the federal bureaucracy, including in the courts and in the military. But the announcement that he will not run again will ease fears in the region, and beyond that, a Kabila candidacy would drag the country back into the civil wars of the turn of the century, in which millions died, mostly from hunger and disease. The third vote should now herald Congo's first democratic transition of power following decades marked by authoritarian rule, coups, and deadly conflicts.
Let's get more on this story from an African affairs analyst, Mr. ACHIKE CHUDE. Thanks for joining us on the program.
Pleasure, thank you.
So after a lot of pressure, President Kabila has agreed not to seek a third term. What effect is this likely to have on democracy in the country? A lot,
clearly, because he has been the single most important person in all of this crisis. This crisis essentially, was generated by him, and so everything has revolved around him. Of course, all the acts of instability and so on, it's all about him. And so for him to have said, of course, there's been a lot of international pressure before now. His tenure, ended in 2016. And of course, luckily for him, there was a constitutional provision that pending the time his successor is chosen, that he can remain in power. And he's been looking for ways before now to tinker with the constitution so that he continues in power. But a series of opposition and the protests all over, of course, so many people have died in the process, people incarcerated and all of that. So the fact that he has announced that he's going to step down is a very huge relief, not just to the DRC, I mean the rest of Africa and then the world also, because people have been riveted, attention has been riveted all this while to what has been going on in the DRC. So when he says he's not going to be part of the equation, it opens up a new vista of opportunities, for the Congolese people and for the country. And so it's about taking advantage of the opportunities that arise, because there are all kinds of possibilities that have emerged all of a sudden, just because, like I said, he has been the single most contributory factor in terms of the violence and the instability that has happened in Congo. So once he's out of the scene, opportunities abound.
So his successor is under EU sanctions. What are his chances of winning, seeing as he's facing ex-Vice President Pierre Bemba?
Yes, well, there are other people in in the running. You also have Felix Tshisekedi, but maybe because of the high-profile nature of Bemba, of course, you know that he is somebody that has just that was indicted at the time, or under the prosecution at the International Criminal Court. He has been released. He just came back a few days ago, and he is somebody that is also quite popular. Again, it is difficult to tell. The campaigns have not exactly started. He's just coming back into the country. He needs to begin to, build his political base. There was something on ground before he came that he met. So he must begin to work on it and to build it and to do the necessary campaigns that are needed. But of course, it is also very clear that you can't exactly say that this is how the election itself is going to turn out. This is how the electoral body is going to conduct itself. I think the major problem, all over Africa has been the inability of opposition parties to unseat ruling governments. And that was the novelty when Jonathan, for instance, President Goodluck Jonathan lost in Nigeria. It was almost like a first in the country. And that was what caught the fancy and the imagination of a lot of people, that in Africa we're beginning to have a situation where ruling governments lose. But this is just Jonathan. A lot of these other people, have not learned anything new. They have forgotten nothing, they have learned nothing. And so the ability for the electoral body to have a free, fair, credible election, I think, is what is critical. It is in the ability to do that the credibility of the entire process rests on. And it is on that basis that you can actually begin to say, look, those who are going to contest against Kabila's successor would have very big chances. But I'm sure that if you look at the spate of elections and the way they are conducted in the continent, it might not give too many people hope that the electoral body would do what they are supposed to do, that is to ensure free, fair, credible election. And the credibility of that election hinges on that. If that happens, then I can say to a very large extent that the most visible of the candidates, Jean-Pierre Bemba, in this instance, would have a very great opportunity because the space has been opened up.
So what are the most pressing issues that the next president will have to face in the country?
DRC is one of the poorest countries in the world, in spite of the abundance of natural resources. Frustration, unemployment, social crisis. Of course, right now they are having this EBOLA crisis again in parts of the DRC. So these are the usual malaise that afflict the African continent. Poverty, hunger, all as a result of bad governance. By their political leaders and all of that. So the challenge really for anybody that is not going to be an easy thing, for anybody that will take over from him, how to rebuild the economy, how to give confidence, to the people, how to generate the kind of, positive energy from the people that can help to push the country on another, to the right direction, to make the country a better place, how to build the country so that those people those refugees, about 4 million of them who have departed the DRC for fear, will begin to come back to their home and all of that. It's not going to be an easy matter. It is going to be exceedingly difficult because this is a country that has never known peace from the very moment that it became an independent country in 1960. It has been a country that has been enmeshed and embroiled in crisis from the assassination of the intervention of international forces, assassination of the first Prime Minister, Patrice Lumumba, then the brutish dictatorial rule of Mobutu Sese Seko, letter of overtaking in an act of violence, and then Joseph Kabila and all of that. So it's one of the most blessed countries in the world in terms of natural resources, but unfortunately it is one of the most abused in terms of natural resources, where you have so many international players coming in also to help destabilize the country because they needed access to resources like uranium and all of those other resources that could the DRC boast of. So it's not going to be a tea party for anybody that takes over from Joseph Kabila.
Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us on the program, African Affairs Analyst Mr. ACHIKE CHUDE.
Thank you very much, Tenny.
Staying on in DR Congo, government officials and the World Health Organization have been vaccinating health workers against the deadly Ebola virus to try to halt an outbreak in the country's volatile east. Health workers in protective suits in Mangina, where the epidemic was declared, administered the injections. So far, 43 people are believed to have been infected in North Kivu and Ituri provinces, including 36 who have died. The WHO says more than 900 contacts of those infected have been identified for monitoring, although security is an issue in the area where militant groups operate. The experimental vaccine being used proved successful during its first wide-scale usage against the previous outbreak in Equatorial Province. Many in South Africa are questioning if there's much to celebrate on Women's Day today, as a funeral is held for a prominent anti-rape activist who took her life after an alleged sexual assault. Last week, before her death, 23-year-old law student Kinsani Maseko had written a post on Instagram saying, "No one deserves to be raped." Days earlier, the third-year student had reported to the authorities at Rhodes University in Grahamstown that she was allegedly raped by a fellow student student in May, but it wasn't until 3 days after her death that the university confirmed its decision to suspend the alleged perpetrator. South Africa has one of the highest rape statistics in the world. Last year, there were nearly 4,000 cases reported to the South African police. Still to come on the program. University students in Egypt design air-powered vehicles with the aim of battling rising fuel prices and carbon emissions. Please stay with us.